that Dan Brown level of interest, which makes it cool, but also makes you susceptible to this is the Billy Carson effect, I think, is when you hear something like, did you know that like Billy Carson thinks that like Catholic churches were built upon like ancient pyramids or something? And again, this is something that we know is a genuine, fairly ancient, well, it is ancient, but it's Christians will argue like, because this is really important, like if the Gospel of Thomas is early, if it's like written at the same time as the Gospel of Mark, then you've got a big problem on your hands, because you've got two contemporary accounts that say totally different things about Jesus. Yeah. So the majority of scholars date it to the mid to late 2nd century. And for Christians, that's enough to say, okay, it's a later document, it's a development, and a lot of it's just like BS. If it is the case that it's dated earlier, it causes a lot of trouble. I have no idea. As I say, dating is very speculative, but there are suggestions either way. So some people think that this has like an Aramaic core of sayings that are legitimately Jesus's and date really early. There's also a hypothesized sayings gospel that we don't have access to. It's called Q. Q, the word for source in German is Quell. So remember how I said that Mark's gospel came first, and then Matthew and Luke both relied heavily on Mark. Mm-hmm. So they're quoting Mark all the time. Like almost all of Mark's gospel is also in Matthew and Luke. But Matthew and Luke also have new material that they've written about. Some of that new material is also identical in Matthew and Luke. You hear what I'm saying? So you've got material that's only in Matthew and Luke, but it's the same in Matthew and Luke. So some scholars think that they had this other source that they were drawing from. You know what I mean? So they've got the Gospel of Mark, and they've got this other source that they were drawing from. That source is called Q, because it doesn't have a name. Q for quell, which is just the German word for source. This comes up in German scholarship. Yeah, if you type in like Q source into Google, it should come up. That's right. It refers to a hypothetical lost Greek language collection of Jesus' sayings, also known as the sayings gospel, that Jesus believed was used. So what I mean to say is that some scholars believe in the existence of this document called Q, which is a list of sayings of Jesus. It's another so-called sayings gospel that Matthew and Luke used as a source. We've never found it. We don't know that it exists. Just from textual analysis, people think that it exists, and there's some debate around that. But the interesting thing is it's a sayings gospel. So the materials that Matthew and Luke both share that aren't in Mark are sayings of Jesus. So there is this known, but we know from the Gospel of Thomas that this is the kind of gospel that does exist, just sayings. And so it's kind of interesting how the Gospel of Thomas, if it were early, might be something a bit like Q. And because some of the quotes in the Gospel of Thomas show up in the synoptic gospels, or the canonical gospels, you then raise the question, well, were the gospel writers using the Gospel of Thomas as a source? Most scholars reject that. They think Thomas is later. But some people like to entertain it as an idea. At the very least, it's incredibly fascinating. All of these gospels are like absolutely mental. There's an Apocalypse of Peter where Jesus just describes in detail what happens in hell and what happens to individual people.
What does he say?
So it depends on your sin. I think people who've blasphemed will be hung by their tongues on a bit of rope over like the fire. I think
damn it.
I think women who've had abortions like have to like watch their screaming babies like get boiled alive or something like this. Like it's described in great detail. These texts are absolutely fascinating, man. And there's loads of them. There's just like loads and loads of these different texts, and they all say different wacky, crazy things. But the thing is, a lot of these date much later than the Gospels. Like we're talking possibly hundreds of years afterwards. So.
Which questions the legitimacy
of
what they
course.
claim.
So you have to bear in mind that a lot of these won't be attached to genuine traditions, but what they do tell us is like they give us insight into what some early Christian communities believed. Like even if you think it's not actually historically connected to Jesus, we know that these are texts that people thought. This is what people actually thought about Jesus. To the extent Gnosticism was so popular, there's a church father, I can't remember which one, I never can, who is advising early Christians as they're going out to spread the message of the gospel that when you come onto a new town, don't say to them, take me to your Christian church. Say to them, take me to your Catholic church. Because Catholic just means universal, like small c Catholic. Because otherwise, they might take you to a Gnostic church. So Gnosticism is so popular that Christian believers are being warned to specify what kind of Christian church they want to be taken to, because it's just so popular that you might end up in a Gnostic church. So Elaine Pagels, who you should really have on the show, although I can't remember where she's based, I don't know if she would come into the studio. She wrote a book in the 70s called The Gnostic Gospels, and it is about looking at the Gnostic Gospels and reframing this idea that the early Christian movement was this unified, like self-corroborating set of Christian doctrines, and there were these texts, and they all basically agreed with each other, and people looked at them, worked it out, set the canon, and that was that. But instead, in the early Christian community, there were all of these different competing views of who Jesus was, all of these different like literatures, all of these different ideas, all of these different cosmologies, and it's all of it is fascinating. I mean,
It's so fascinating.
demiurge, creator of the universe, evil material. It's so cool, but that's why you also have to resist it, because it has that Dan Brown level of interest, which makes it cool, but also makes you susceptible to, this is the Billy Carson effect, I think, is when you hear something like, did you know that like Billy Carson thinks that like Catholic churches were built upon like ancient pyramids or something? It's like totally wacky. But if you hear that, if you're the kind of person that goes like, cool, yeah, all right, I'll run with that. Yeah, that works. That checks out. Then, and that can definitely happen here. So you've got to be careful not to give it too much. But it also means that people are intentionally forging things. My favorite gospel forgery is the gospel of Jesus' wife.
Mary Magdalene.
Can you pull up gospel of Jesus' wife?
You talking about Mary
Pull up an
Magdalene?
image? Yeah, well, so I'm not talking about Mary Magdalene, but of Jesus' wife, yeah. And just look at the image. Click on that image. So this is a fragment of a bit of papyrus with some...
Is that Sharpie?
No. It's not, because that would be an easy tell. So although there's some forgeries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Washington D.C., there's the Museum of the Bible in Washington D.C. You don't know? There's a Museum of the Bible in Washington D.C.
I don't
You don't know that, bro?
I don't think I've ever been there.
You don't know about the Museum of the Bible, bro?
I'm not a huge DC guy, man.
Damn, you're not a big Bible guy. You're not a big DC guy.
I'm not a big DC guy.
It doesn't add up.
I've also been on camera since 12:07 p.m. and it's 9:49, so my memory is like a little.
Yeah,
off
no. It's a museum in DC, right? And it opened fairly recently. I can't remember exactly when. Probably like 20, like in the 2010s, probably, maybe even later, like 2019 or something. Anyway, there are these Dead Sea Scroll fragments. You know about the Dead Sea Scrolls? You've probably done an episode about them, right? So there are these Dead Sea Scroll fragments. They've got, I think, about 10 of them on display. They're forgeries. They end up being proved to be forgeries. And so they had to, firstly, they put up a message which basically said underneath them, these might be forgeries. And then they had to take them down. And my friend Kip Davis, who, I don't know if you've had Kip on the show.
Kip Davis was on Danny's show. I think.
He was. And you should have him on here too. If you want to do a Dead Sea Scrolls episode, he's your guy.
Yeah.
He was one of the people, I think, involved in analyzing these documents. And one of the ways they realized that this is fake is that like if you look at the text, although the papyrus is real and the penmanship is correct and everything, they found like residue of salt on the papyrus, right? Now they were found near the Dead Sea, which is a very salty place, and they could have just been salt for any kind of reasons. However, they did molecular analysis on the salt. Some of that salt, by the way, was underneath the ink. So like baked in, like the text had gone over the top of it. And they did molecular analysis on it and found that it was table salt, which was invented in like the Middle Ages. And so they know that it's forgery, right? What it means is that people do take genuinely ancient papyrus. So if you carbon date it, it checks out, and they write things on it. Like Wes Huff has done that, not in an attempt to forge anything, but to make a facsimile. So just for like a hobby.
I thought you were about to blow my mind for a minute.
So like, I think he gave one of these to Joe Rogan. So like, there's this document, there's this fragment called P52, which is a fragment of John's Gospel, and I think Wes Huff like takes a bit of ancient papyrus from the actual time and then like copies by hand. So you've got like a sort of fake version of it, which is just like for fun.
Yeah.
So you can do that. So this here, gentlemen, is the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So cool because it's just a fragment of text, which if you click out of it for a second, you'll probably see a bit of information about it. It's 4th century, ignore forge for now, papyrus fragment with Coptic text that includes the words, Jesus said to them, my wife, and the text received widespread attention. Okay, so it's a fragment that it says, Jesus said to them, my wife. And then at some other point, I think it mentions Mary Magdalene, and it's written in Coptic. Now,
so to be clear though, this is not the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. This is
that's a different thing.
Yes.
Sorry, I hear what you're saying now. There is a separate thing called the Gospel of Mary Magdalene.
I just want to make sure people understand that.
This is the Gospel of Jesus' wife. And like I said, it's just a fragment, and it gets a lot of attention because, again, whether or not you believe that it's actually tied to the historical Jesus, there's been this conspiracy theory for a while that Jesus is married to Mary Magdalene. So at the very least, this might be an ancient document from a community that believed that. Really interesting.
Do you think there's anything to that, by the way?
Probably not. No,
You don't think so?
I don't know, but I think it's really hard to say. Mary Magdalene is like hardly mentioned. Some of the most interesting things about the Gospels is these famous characters don't get like mentioned at all. Like you could read the whole of Matthew's Gospel. I don't think Mary Magdalene shows up till the resurrection, or like after, or maybe the crucifixion. It's just like you sort of imagine them being there, and they were historically, of course. But in the actual text, we have so little information. It's impossible to say. We don't even know why she's called Mary Magdalene. Same thing with Judas Iscariot. What does Iscariot mean?
No clue.
Who knows? Some people think that it's there's a group there's a word for dagger. I think there's a group of people who are called something like I don't know, I can't remember the word for it, but like the Icarii or something, which sounds like Iscariot, and they were a group of people who would kill Roman officials who were oppressing the Jewish state. And so some people think that Judas was one of these people, and that's where he got his name, because he's Judas the Icarii, or however you say it. Okay. Which would make sense because he is kind of an assassin, because he sort of assassinates Jesus, and so that kind of makes sense. Like he might be a zealot. Some people think that there might be like a place, like he's Judas of Iscariot. Same thing with Mary Magdalene. There is a place called like Magdalene or Magdalena or something in Israel, but it's unclear if that place existed, if that's what she was named after, if the place was named after her. I think it's a bit outside of my area of expertise, but like we don't know what Magdalene means, so we know so little about them. But we do know is that there's this text discovered, the Gospel of Jesus' Wife, which has this fragment on it and says, in fact, if you scroll down the text word for word, we've got it actually written down. It says, and again, there's a lot missing because it's just a fragment. So, not to me, my mother gave me life, gap, the disciples said to Jesus, gap, Mary is not worthy of it. That kind of sounds similar to the Gospel of Thomas, doesn't it? Mary's not. Jesus said to them, my wife, there's a gap. She is able to be my disciple. There's a gap. So it's like, maybe it's Mary Magdalene because she's mentioned, but it's not entirely clear, right? And so there's this big debate about whether it's real or not. Now, there's a lot of research done into this.
All proven forged.
There's a lot of reasons why we might think it's a forgery, but here's my favorite nail in the coffin for why it's a forgery. The Gospel of Jesus' Wife quotes the Gospel of Thomas, as I've just said, right? Mm-hmm. It quotes the Gospel of Thomas, but it quotes it in a particular translation of the Gospel of Thomas.
What do you mean in particular? Oh, one of the many.
So it's like a translation of the Gospel of Thomas, and on the papyrus, it's quoting the Gospel of Thomas in a particular translation. There is a mistake in the translation of the Gospel of Thomas on the papyrus. So the way the Gospel of Thomas is quoted on this papyrus, on this fragment, is mistaken. It's not actually what the Gospel of Thomas says. Now now a scribe could have just made that mistake, right?
Yeah.
However, there is one other place where this exact same mistake shows up, which is on a website which translates the Gospel of Thomas. And in fact, the line breaking, the formatting of the text was exactly identical to this website that translates the Gospel of Thomas.
Because this was presented in 2012, so this is long after the internet.
That's quite right. Yeah. So the chances of that lining up in that way are unfathomably small. So what has happened is somebody has taken, because they carbon dated the papyrus and it's genuinely old. It's like 4th century. So someone has taken a 4th century bit of papyrus
and desecrated it
and created and forged this fragment. In doing so, they've decided to quote a bit of the Gospel of Thomas, and to get the words right, they've used a website's translation, and they've copied a mistake that was on the website, leaving this digital footprint on this 4th century papyrus, and that's how we know that it's a forgery.
This is why we can't have nice things.
Isn't that cool, man? Isn't that just hilarious? It's like the table salt on the Dead Sea Scroll. It's so fascinating.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.